Thank you. Okay, so let's go over the parts real quick. We got 2 transfer case gaskets. Well, there's one there, but the other one's in the garage. I was test fitting it. We have some radiator spring clamps. We have a brand new input shaft bearing for the transfer case, 2 low profile drain plugs, and OEM Toyota FIPG. So guys, we actually can't install the parts yet because when I was disassembling the transfer cases, I found out that we actually have a 23 spline input gear, and that won't work on a W56 transmission. You have to have a 21 spline input gear. So as you can see here, we have a 23 spline. So I'm gonna go over to my buddy Tanner's house and get this thing swapped out for the 21 spline that he has laying around. And let me just clarify a little bit further here. In your rear reduction unit, a 23 spline input is totally fine, and it's the preferred way if you have a 23 spline coupler in your dual case adapter. But in your crawl box, which is your front box, you have to have a 21 spline input gear, or it's not gonna bolt up to a 22RE transmission, which is a W56. So in this bucket, I have a Toyota V6 third member. And the reason why I picked that up is because it's a little bit stronger than the 4-cylinder third member. So we're gonna run it in the rear end of this truck. But I need to build it with 529 gears and a Yukon Grizzly locker, but I have nowhere to hold it. So we're gonna go ahead and build a third member holder today that'll bolt onto an engine stand. Should make the job a lot easier. All right, we're taking the SS today to go pick up that 21 spline input gear. Maybe stop by and get some McDonald's on the way, who knows?
Okay, Surfy.
Can I have 4 double cheeseburgers and 2 McChickens with no lettuce, please?
Okay, so 4 McNuggles and 2 McChickens?
Yep, that's it.
All right, $9.72 at the first window.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't judge me, guys. I'm not eating it all in one sitting. I'm eating over the course of like 1 sitting maybe, but 2 days probably. All right, so we're gonna get the hardware from True Value here to build that third member holder. I'm thinking we're gonna get square stock or something like that, weld it together, and then make little tabs to hold the third member, but we'll see what we come up with. All right, so I think we're gonna use square tubing, which should be able to build a durable frame to hold that third member up. So this is my friend James's 4Runner that he's been working on. I sold it to him a few months ago. It's on 33s, has ball joint spacers in the front, Land Cruiser coils in the rear. He's put a roof rack on it since he's owned it, those sliders. Broke a couple idler arms, put that light bar on it. He's been having fun with it since he's owned it. You'll likely see this one in videos with my truck when we go up wheeling. It's a pretty solid rig. So I got this square tube here and this flat bar, and we're basically gonna use this to bolt to the engine stand and use the rest of the square tube to come off of it this way and that way, and use this flat bar to create tabs to hold the differential or the third member, and then maybe create some gussets so that it doesn't bend on the stand. I bought some 5/8 hardware here, but it doesn't fit into the 5/8 hole because the bolt has a shoulder. So all right, so we gotta stop by my parents' house real quick to pick up a spare third member housing I have to test fit this stuff. That's my buddy Joel. He used to have a Toyota too, but he just sold it. He's gonna buy a new one soon. All right, that's Pepper over there crossing the street. All right, so this is the third member we're gonna use for mocking up the mount. It has bolt holes here that we can use as a template to make the tabs that'll hold this to the third member mount. This came out of my straight axle that I bought for the pickup, and I can't reuse it because everything with this thing is kind of fucked up. If you look at the ring gear here, all of the damage to those teeth, we can't reuse this. This is garbage. All right, so we're gonna take the pinion out of this thing and use this as a template to build our mount. Okay, so this is what we came up with. We used some angle iron and some square tube, welded it to the square tube. It's gonna mount on each side of the third member, and one slotted tab on the front there. And then it will bolt into the engine stand with these two holes. So this is the finished result of the third member holder, bolted to the engine stand with 1/2" hardware, and to the actual mount itself with 5/16 hardware. It's very stout. I don't think it'll go anywhere. Our hole for this front mount didn't fit, so might have to re-drill that, but seems to be doing good with the two mounts on each side. Should make setting this thing up a lot easier. The 21 spline input is secured, and now we need to press this bearing on it. Let's do it. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm about to take on a pretty involved project is get my workspace nice and clean. We can see that my workspace is not nice and clean. So let's go ahead and do the magic of the interwebs and get this thing clean at the snap of a finger. So now we have a pretty good area to start working on this thing. So let's go ahead and jump into it. When inspecting this input gear, I noticed that it was pretty dirty. So we're gonna go ahead and clean this thing up before we press the bearing on so we don't get any of that debris inside the bearing itself. Okay, so we have the input gear in the press and we're about to press the bearing onto it. Make sure that when you install this bearing that this groove is pointing up, because that goes through the front reduction housing case, and there's a snap ring right here that needs to snap around this bearing to hold it in place. We used a 54mm socket and an old race to make sure that we didn't do any damage to this bearing. So it would have been better to use a pipe that fit the diameter of the inside of the bearing here, but we didn't have a pipe that size, so we just made do with what we had, and it worked fine. So we're gonna go ahead and put the snap ring back on it now with these snap ring pliers. And that's it. We now have our 21 spline input gear ready to install in our dual case setup. All right, so at this point we just need to put this thing back together. This is our dual case adapter here, our low speed gear. What we need to do next is install the shift collar and the shift fork. So we're gonna put the shift fork into its hole here, slide the shift collar over the fork, and align it with the coupler / low speed gear, just like that. Now we're going to install the counter shaft into the adapter. There's little tiny needles, of course, in this needle bearing here. Make sure that none have fallen out. They fall out really easy. So I recommend getting a dab of grease and running it along the inside of that needle bearing, as well as on the end of the counter shaft here. And then triple check that all your needle bearings are in here. All right, so we absolutely have all of the needles in our needle bearing, for a lack of better terms. We're gonna grease the end of this counter shaft here. install it into the dual case adapter. Now we're going to install the pocket bearing and the input gear. So you have this little pocket bearing here. You're going to want to pack this thing full of grease as well. I'll put a little bit more on this. Okay, and you might as well put some inside of your coupler as well. Drop this inside, just like that. Take a little bit of your leftover grease and put it on your input gear. Go ahead and put that inside the pocket bearing. And that's it. Now we just need to bolt the reduction housing to the assembly. We have the crawl box assembled. I was gonna put this thing together with the Toyota FIPG that I bought, but it never cured. I let this thing sit on here for 4 days and it just never sealed. So we just used Permatex Gear Oil RTV instead. And this stuff can go right in the trash. For sealing the crawl box to the transfer case, I'm going to use an OEM Toyota paper gasket, and I'm going to seal it with Permatex High Tack. I've had pretty good success with this in the past when I used to be a motorcycle mechanic, so we'll go ahead and try our luck here again. Jesus Christ, mate. Finally. Man, that was not easy at all. Stuff glued itself shut. Guys, I forgot to hit record when I was putting the crawl box onto the transfer case. Sorry. We're just tightening up all these nuts now. All right, the dual cases are done. Let's get these things installed. Let's take a look under here and see what we have to remove to take off this transfer case. All right, so we have to remove the drive shaft, the cross member, probably the speedometer cable, some other sensors up there like the 4-wheel drive indicator. And it's looking like that's really it. Then just unbolt it off of the back of the transmission. So let's get to it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and remove the speedometer cable now. Pretty easy. It was already loose. And man, it is a mess down here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I think it's from where the transfer case mates to the transmission. You can see there's actually a loose bolt there. It's not even tightened. The rest of the transmission doesn't really look like it's leaking. It just looks like it might be getting blow-by from the transfer case. So we're gonna undo this 4-wheel drive switch now. Okay, the 4-wheel drive indicator's off. It took 2 hands to do that, so I had to put the camera down, but that's off. So now we're gonna go remove the transfer case shifter and then unbolt this cross member and unbolt the transfer case from the transmission, and this thing should just drop right out. I don't know why they used Phillips head screws here instead of some sort of hex head bolt. Would have made this a lot easier. It's not hard, it's just kind of annoying trying to remove these. Now we can remove the shifter by taking off those 10mm bolts. So these are actually 12mm bolts, so we'll go ahead and remove those now. I think I actually found the cause of another leak, by the way. These inside bolts, since they're kind of hard to get to, they weren't even tightened down. So I think this thing was leaking out of the side of this flange here. Actually, it was. You can see there it's clean, and then on the right side it's all wet. So it was leaking from there as well. All right, guys, I just removed the 6 bolts that hold the transfer case to the transmission, and this is actually a pretty good tip for keeping track of your bolts when you're working on a project like this. Just put them in some cardboard. So now I need to figure out a way to hold this transmission up so I can remove this transfer case, because the actual cross member mounts to the bottom of the transfer case. I think it'll do the job. It's not ideal, but this is going to be sitting here for a couple of days, and I like that it has this locking feature, so if this thing loses hydraulic pressure, it won't all come falling down. So we're gonna run it. I think it'll be just fine. With just the right amount of wooden blocks here, we have created a perfect disaster. So this technique is absolutely going to result in a trip to the hospital, so I'm gonna need to find a different way to get this thing off. And when it comes to installing those dual cases, definitely gonna get some help. Guys, in an incredible display of stupidity, I have come out victorious. Well, the transfer case is off, and that was incredibly dangerous, but it looks pretty clean in there, surprisingly. I definitely want to replace that seal while I'm in here. My makeshift mount seems to be doing the job just fine, and don't worry, it is locked, so it's not going anywhere. The transfer case off of my truck has this little retention plate that holds the input shaft and the counter shaft in place so they don't come too far forward. I don't remember seeing that on my crawl box or my transfer case. And I don't even see a place where I could bolt that thing in. So I need to do some research and see maybe if this is something that didn't come on all transfer cases. It turns out that not all transfer cases came with a bearing retainer clip, so these must be out of an older truck, but that's fine. Once this is all put together, the bearings can't go anywhere. The last thing that I need to do before I install these is clean off this case. There's no way that's going into my truck that dirty. Well, the cases are clean. Both of the low profile drain plugs are installed. I had to fix both of these bolt holes with a helicoil, and I extended my 4-wheel drive sensor wire. So these are ready to install. And that should work as a mount to get that thing installed. Okay guys, so that rope is not supporting the entire transmission, it's just supporting the rear half of it. As you can see, we do have a jack stand supporting the transmission. Okay, so the current predicament is that the transmission is at a different angle than the transfer case. So you can see that the transmission is kind of pointing downwards where the transfer case is level. So we're going to use these old shackles from my truck to wedge under the mount there to put this at the same angle as the transmission. The dual cases are installed. Now we just gotta fasten it up and mount it up with the cross member, and we should be done. All right guys, the dual cases are installed. Just finished cutting out the hole for the rear case. You know, I had an idea where I kind of wanted this ring to have threaded inserts in these 2 tabs that I made so that I could bolt this thing down in a somewhat OEM way. But in order to, you know, remove the shifter if I ever had to, I would need to make more room around this, kind of like how the OEM shifter hole is. So I have to come up with something else there. One other hiccup is that I bought this trail gear, oh, excuse me. I bought this trail gear dual cross member mount used, and it turns out that it's actually for a V6 model. So it's not gonna work. So I need to sell that before I can finish this thing up entirely. But I'm really tired, guys. It's been a lot of work, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.